Welcome to a fascinating webinar we're going to have today from TipHaus and Deputy about from service charges to voluntary tips, how restaurants are adapting to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. My name is Braden Hess. I am the MC for today's conversation. I'm the Senior Director of Commercial Operations here at Deputy, and I am really excited for all of the people who are joining here today. So before I introduce our two guests, just a couple housekeeping items just to think about. Number one, live chat, Q&A. We have this amazing tool here that we can use to ask questions. If you have a question while things are being presented, please throw them in the chat. We've got folks in the chat who are looking at them. They will star them, and they will we'll kind of hit those questions at the end during the Q&A session. So please engage. Otherwise, you may fall asleep. It's right around lunchtime. Number two, recording. This is being recorded. So if you're not able to attend, you have to drop off. You only have a few minutes because you have another meeting or something else going on. Don't worry. You're on the registration list. You'll get a copy of this recording afterwards. We're glad that you're here, and we hope that you can stay for as long as you can. And last of all, just stay tuned for our resources. In the chat, we'll have links, videos, upcoming webinars, case studies, everything you can imagine in the chat we'll be sharing here. So really excited to have us here. To kick things off, I want to first introduce Kirk, who's the COO and co-founder of TipHaus. Kirk, I'll throw it to you to give your introduction, and then we'll throw it over to Sohail, who's our other guest, which you'll see in just a minute.
You got it. Hello, everyone. I'm Kirk Grogan, COO and co-founder, as Braden mentioned. If you're not familiar with TipHaus, we kind of innovated the tip management suite platform. And so end to end, from the moment a customer leaves a tip that is going to your employees to the moment that tip hits your employee's bank account. And everything in between, banquets and things of that nature, all included, founded by a bunch of restaurant operators and owners and investors in the past. So familiar with it, passionate about the industry, and very thankful to be here today with Braden and, of course, with Sohail, if you want to take it away.
Thank you. My name is Sohail Punjwani. I serve as Product Compliance Counsel at Deputy. I've been in the industry for about 6 years. My focus today is about how operators translate changes in the legal and tax environment into practical workflows that are easier to explain and defend. Happy to be here chatting with y'all. Thank you.
Awesome. Excited to jump into it. So here's what we're going to do. So we're going to cover 5 different topics today. I'll walk them through quickly. And the way it's going to happen is it's going to be sort of a Q&A. I'll kind of throw some questions to Kirk, throw some questions to Sohail. Maybe they'll both respond. And we'll just kind of have this back and forth Q&A. And like I said, if they say something that interests you, if there's a question, throw it in the chat. We'll make sure we try and cover it at the end. We want to make sure this is as engaging as it can be. So today we're covering a few things. Why service charges become the industry standard, what the One Big Beautiful Bill Act changes for tipped employees, how operators are rethinking compensation models, the role of scheduling and labor visibility, and lastly, what does a modern tip workflow look like given these changes? So to kick things off, I'm going to throw the question over to Sohail. Let's start with how we got here. Service charges became a major trend over the last several years. Why do so many operators move in that direction, and what problems were they trying to solve at the time?
Yeah, thank you, Braden. Operators adopted service charges because of real workforce issues and margin challenges, right? They didn't do it to create complexity. So service charges gave operators more predictability in a period of labor volatility, staffing shortages, and pressure to stabilize wages. They also helped restaurants support back-of-house roles like dishwashers and reduce the availability employees experience under purely voluntary tipping models. The trade-off is a simple one, right? Service charge is usually controlled by the business, not by the customer, in the same way as a voluntary tip is. The categorization is now more important than ever with the OBBBA, try saying that 5 times at the same time, puts renewed attention of what qualifies as a tip. So the model made sense for a lot of businesses at the time. What has changed is a tax and transparency environment around tipped income now with this bill.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Sohail. Super helpful. Kirk, question up on your side.
Mm-hmm.
From where you sit working with operators every day, when you look back at how service charge models were actually implemented, where do operators tend to make assumptions that are now coming back to bite them?
Great question. 2 major areas. One is thinking that, this all exists in a hypothetical, that all of our servers are equal, all of our bartenders are equal. And then the second is going to be that, service charge is just a tip by a different name. Sohail touched on it, like the ability to handle margins, the ability to take that money in and distribute it accordingly. You'd see restaurants going and moving towards benefits or 401ks or PTO, things of that were great. All of those are great pieces. Problem with that assumption is that now legally, now tax-wise, these are fundamentally very different things. And then, when we talk about that all servers are equal, you're assuming that your best servers can't earn more than that service charge. And you're assuming that, the lowest performing, your worst servers, your worst bartenders on staff are going to be able to earn that neutral amount, the same as your best, without any level of frustration or animosity. Some famous cases, a group out of New York, I won't name names, but very, very well known, James Beard, Michelin star winning group, famously tried to implement this. They lost their best performers, and about a year and a half into this, they kind of backtracked and went back to a tipping model after going entirely towards service charges. They're both great, but making sure that you get transparency for the staff was a major issue. Making sure that all staff being treated equally works in your operations was something that a lot of people overlooked. And then, of course, now with OBBBA and the tax implications on it, service charge is going to see that downward trend. There's still a few cases where you might want to utilize them. But realistically, servers not getting a tax credit, keeping $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 out of their pocket is going to be a shift here that people need to prepare for.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for that. When you think about why the OBBBA changes everything, let's talk about an element around that and how it changes the conversation. So something significant has definitely shifted with this act. For operators in our audience who may still be getting up to speed, this question's for Sohail. What does OBBBA change, and why does it matter specifically for how tip income is structured?
Thank you, Braden. I'm going to try to say as many B's as I can possibly say in there. So the OBBBA is one of the largest federal laws passed in 2025. It changes the conversation because it creates a federal deduction opportunity for qualified tips, which makes employers and operators look more closely at how income is categorized, right? So the IRS describes a no tax on tips provision as applying to qualified tips for 2025 and sunsetting in 2028, subject to a $25,000 cap and an income phase out. There's a lot more minor requirements for married couples and all those different things. So we're not going to go into that. The IRS also states that qualified tips are voluntary cash or charge tips, including shared tips, and must be in occupation that customarily and regularly receive tips before 2025. So you can't just change things now and call them tips, right? It has to be something that was already there in place. The key operational issue is classification. Mandatory service charges and automatic gratuities generally do not qualify as tips. For this purpose, this means operators need their system to preserve the distinction between a voluntary tip and a mandatory charge from the moment the guest pays. So, putting it all together, it basically means the nature of the money has to be the same from the beginning to the end.
Okay, but you bring up something interesting here, though. So it sounds like what you're saying is a lot of the systems that exist today, they aren't built really to distinguish clearly, I think, between those two elements, a voluntary tip and a service charge. So what is the real compliance exposure here for the folks on the call, for the operators who haven't addressed that yet? And what should they be auditing internally right now?
So, the exposure is not one single mistake. It is the gap between how the money is presented to the guest, coded in the POS, allocated to employees, reported through payroll, and explained to workers, right? I've been a lawyer, I've been an operator before, and the one thing I can say, transparency goes a long way. So that's kind of my take in a nutshell. But, start with receipts and POS labels, right? If an amount is mandatory, automatic, or dictated by policy, calling it a tip letter does not solve the classification issue. You can call an apple pizza however much you want, but it's not pizza. Audit earning codes and payroll treatments, service charges paid to employees are generally treated as wages, not tips, and may affect regular rate and overtime calculations, right? So we can also look at Department of Labor guidance also states that employers, managers, and supervisors generally cannot keep employee tips. So you have to also audit managers and supervisor participation in any tip pooling as well. And then the last thing is, if employees cannot understand how compensation is structured, the risk becomes both a compliance risk and a trust problem at the same time. And the compliance problem in this case stems from issues beyond tax issue and delve into wage and hour issue depending on the jurisdiction you're in. So you have not only tip issues, you have wage and hour issue, and each issue is basically stacked on top of the other issues.
Got it. Okay. All right, let me flip the question over to Kirk's side. So Kirk, you said that roughly half of the servers, they may struggle to fully benefit from the OBBBA because operators haven't really restructured their systems. But what's actually getting in the way? Is it technology? Is it awareness? Is it something else?
Sure, a good way to look at it. All three more included. We look at 2025. This went into effect on July 4th, right? And so it was retroactive from Jan 1 to December 31st of 2025. And you got that application on April 15th, hopefully when everyone filed their federal taxes. And you're doing it retroactively. You're required to enter the voluntary tips, and that gives you your change back on either your savings from your tax liability, or you're getting a larger refund. Those are great. Just pro tip for anyone out there: if your employees did not take advantage of that, you can file Form 1040X. Go through that. Those thousands of dollars are not gone, even if you already filed and it got accepted. So please take advantage of that. We're working with servers across the nation. But to really dive into it, awareness is the number one issue here. Awareness for employees, making sure that they understand what this looks like and what it's going to look like in 2026, that it's no longer on a federal April 15th filing. It should be taking place every payroll period. For operators, making sure that we're using, codes TP and TT for tips and overtime respectively in boxes 12 and 14B, I think it is. I have to check. I'm not going to pretend to be a tax expert on that front, but making sure we're setting these up. I think a lot of operators don't even understand that there may be some actions needed to be taken to benefit their staff. There again, we're talking making sure service charges are not going to be the standard going forward, that these are voluntary tips left for the staff. That gives them a massive tax savings right there. Understanding that piece and making sure you're working through that and working with tools and vendors that make sure that they understand it. Obviously, we're here, Deputy and TipHaus, trying to make sure we're educating and informed on it. But all of your vendors, whoever that may be, whether it's on payroll, whether it's on HRM, tip management platform, POS, making sure there's a clean audit trail. So a little bit of a technology problem, but awareness, I think, is the largest from operators to employees, and even so much as making sure operators are sharing this knowledge with the employees that they are going to save more. $65,000 in a corporate job versus $65,000 earned in tips does not equal the same as a net after taxes are done. The server will take more money home from that. That's a great advantage to this industry, but only if we, the individuals in this industry, start preaching that, making sure servers are aware of it, and we start trying to get the value out of this bill. So a little bit of everything. Awareness, though, and communication, transparency, I think, Braden, number one piece that people need to pay attention to.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point too when you're talking about awareness, which is around the element of building trust from the operators to the employees.
Yeah,
I think when we talk about what we need to do differently or how we think about it, so when tip structures are not clearly communicated, whether, like you mentioned, a service charge isn't explained or the distribution that's not transparent, what can that do to the employee relationship? What are you seeing on the ground? And you work in this industry every day, all day, and you're seeing this. Tell us more about what is happening when their pay is not, when the workers don't know or understand how their pay is being structured.
That's a great question, and something I think a lot of people overlook, unfortunately. It destroys trust. I mean, very, very simple. It destroys trust. We are in a tight labor market for the service industry. Trust is too expensive to lose for something so nominal, something that's so easy to solve. Obviously, when a server, when a bartender, when any of these individuals don't understand their tip out, they don't understand how much they earn on a given day, given night, whatever it may be. The assumption is not the system's right and my math is wrong. The assumption is someone has taken something from me. That's my money. That is my livelihood. I need to dive into this and figure it out. I need to bombard my manager with questions. I need to ask other servers what they earn and start trying to run math. All of these kill trust. And obviously, they're a massive sunk cost to the industry and to your operation. Very, very simply put, we've put out case studies with it, but obviously with TipHaus, we have a free mobile employee app that we share. We don't mandate it, nothing. It's 99% adoption rate from employees. That's how hungry they are for information about their tip earnings and what that looks like. And most importantly is, documented 30% reduction in turnover. And we didn't do anything. The operators didn't have to do anything. We just gave them access to an app that broke down their earnings step by step, line by line, all the way through it for every shift, every week, every pay period, whatever it may be. And just that little fact alone is a 30% reduction in turnover. which if you've been in the industry long enough, you know that the real cost, the hidden cost, all of the things of what turnover costs you as an organization. So, destroying trust is not just, it's a name, it's an idea. It is a massive hit to the books and on your line item savings if you're able to keep these staff members longer, if you're able to foster that trust, that culture of accountability and belief in each other there.
Love that. And I think you're hitting on the next point here, which is around visibility, right? And that transparency as an operator to the employees. So,
Sure.
Kirk, given that you live in this field and you work with it day in and day out, and many people on this webinar are also living this day in and day out. When you work with a restaurant group, for example, where their labor data is dialed in versus one that isn't, what does that gap actually look like on the TipHaus side? And what breaks down in tip calculation and distribution when that foundation really isn't there to begin with?
Good question. It makes all the difference in the world. Very happy to be great partners with Deputy. We between us have rolled out some large concepts before, flawlessly. Onboarding simple. Their processes are simple. Their payroll periods are going down from 15 to 20 hours per pay period down to 30 minutes, an hour. And it really just comes because all of the data and all the work is done for you. If the inputs are great, the outputs will be great, right? And so if you don't have managers who are trying to edit these Excel sheets and go through manual corrections, if you have employees who are clocking into the correct role, they're clocking in and clocking out at the correct times, you understand their tip eligible hours. If all of that information is flowing between your systems correctly, and that requires a little bit of management on site, good training, making sure you're holding people accountable, making sure you're getting them off the clock when they should, so they're not taking more from the tip pool or tip share than they should. But it truly is a night and day piece. If you want a seamless operation, easiest way to do that is to empower your systems with great data and good training on site. And once you have those two things, I hesitate to say anyone is ever fully automated. You always want a man in the middle to review items, right? You want a payroll person, you want a manager to be verifying. But realistically, it should go from hours of work, tedious with lots of potential for errors and fraud and things of that nature, to a cursory 1 to 2 minute review. Yes, these are the employees who work today. They look like they all got off the clock at the right time. Great. And thankfully, Deputy and TipHaus, when we work together, the data handoff is clean from the start. It's a great piece.
Awesome. So we talked about the trust and how that transparency helps on the trust side. Let's talk about it from a compliance perspective. So Sohail, I'm going to throw it your way. From a compliance perspective, when operators do have inconsistent scheduling data or time tracking gaps, like what is in reality their legal exposure? And why does that data integrity matter before tip distribution even happens?
Yeah, so data integrity matters before tip distribution because the tip or compensation output is only as defensible from a legal perspective as the labor inputs underneath it, right? So if hours are wrong, roles are wrong, or employees move across locations without clean records, the downstream allocation becomes harder to explain and easier to dispute. Like Kirk said, there's a trust factor and there's also a compliance factor as well here. Time records also matter for minimum wage, overtime, tip credit, regular rate analysis, even when the immediate conversation is about tips. And also with that, scheduling transparency matters as well because employees want to understand not just what they are paid, but why they are paid that way. So Deputy supports that foundation, right? By helping operators keep schedules, time records, roles, job assignments, location and structure, and more reviewable and friendly manner. And, there are also secondary issues here as well. Related to data integrity, such as record keeping obligations. I always tell my clients, no matter how pretty your HRS system is, it is your obligation to maintain proper records, and that is what the Department of Labor is probably going to ask of you. Another issue is that good data leads to better transparency, which leads to a higher morale in the workplace and less turnover, right? So once the labor inputs are reliable, the tip logic has a stronger foundation to work from a compliance perspective.
Got it. Awesome. Super helpful. Thanks, Kirk and Sohail, for that information too. And I think it's really helpful to understand the trust side, but then also the compliance side. I think most people here are probably like, yeah, we get it. Like there's an impact here. So like, what does it look like now? How do we change with this one big, beautiful bill? And what does that modern workflow look like? So I'm kind of going to throw it to each of you to answer this question. So if you're an operator, maybe if you're listening to this webinar, you want to build a genuinely OBBBA ready workflow today. Love that acronym. From clock in to payout, like what does that system need to have in place? I'll throw it to Sohail first. What's on your checklist? And then we'll flip over to Kirk and what's here on yours. So Sohail, take it away.
Yeah, from the deputy side, I think a modern workflow starts at clock in, not at payout, right? First, the operator needs a clear policy about what is a voluntary tip, what is a service charge, and how each is handled. The more transparent the policy, the better. So, second, the POS and the payroll mapping needs to preserve the distinction between a service charge and a voluntary tip throughout the entire workflow from deputy all the way across the tip house. Third, the labor inputs need to be reliable, accurate schedule, good clock in and clock out hygiene, role, location, and job assignment data. They need to have all of those in place before the data can be transferred anywhere else. Fourth, managers need a uh, exception process before payroll is finalized. Like, Kirk talked about, somebody has to be in there checking the data. It doesn't mean spend all day with the data. It's been, means 20, 30 minutes, but at least spot checking it, right? And they need to do this not after an employee notices a problem in a reactive manner, but in a proactive manner while the data is being processed throughout the different pay period. This process should be in place for good process, for good hygiene, should run simultaneously as the employee payroll cycle occurs, not just on the Monday before you have to process payroll and it needs to be paid out on Friday. If it's in that week, it's too late in my perspective. Lastly, employees need a clear statement or explanation of how compensation was determined for them, right? So this could be, written is better, oral's okay. I like to say, but a lot of operators are mom and pop shops. They can't have a written policy in place, but if they have even an oral understanding, that's fine too. But written is always better. So deputy sets the labor foundation, and TipHaus takes those clean inputs and turns it into calculations, distributions, reporting, and payout. And this is where I would, hand it to Kirk, because once those inputs are clean, TipHaus is a system translating those inputs into the tip and the payout workflow.
Awesome. Throw it over to Kirk. Let's hear your side of the story on TipHaus.
Well, spot on, and agreed with what Sohail says on that side first. I mean, starts with understanding like the classification, right? What's a voluntary tip? What's a service charge? And even groups that say, oh, well, we only use voluntary tips. What about parties of 6 or more, 8 or more? Are you applying things there? And those need to make into the system accurately, right? Those are still that's a service charge. It was not a voluntary piece. So paying attention to those elements and how you treat that, what the tax treatment on those items are. But agreed on the idea, like I'll touch specifically, I guess, on the tip side of it. So consistent documented distribution rules. TipHaus, the way we handle this is, I mentioned employee app earlier. What that does is it breaks down, obviously, everyone's tip earnings, but you also see all of the tip policies that affect you. If you're a bartender and you tip pool between you and another bartender working the well, great. Okay, we've got that documented for you. You can understand how that's going to impact you. Similarly, we automatically pick up, and again, touching on clean data coming in, but we automatically will separate service charges, voluntary tips for you, cash tips, et cetera. So all of that is broken down so each server can see exactly which portions of that you on manager, payroll, accounting, whatever side of the fence you sit as an operator, owner, you should have clean lines of sight into that. Okay, well, we're getting 85% of our total volume and take home for our staff is coming through voluntary tips. 15% comes from large service charges to large parties, et cetera, whatever that might be. But it gives you a good running number on that. And then really, the automated piece, if you got clean data, that is the number one start to the workflow that we already touched on. Clean data coming in, you audit your systems, you make sure you understand what it looks like. You're, on top of your stuff with your staff, making sure clock ins, clock outs, right job codes being used at the right times. All of that stuff is kind of table stakes for getting this right. But, I do want to touch on like the transparency. Written documentation is great, verbal. My preference for all groups is a little bit of both. And it's not just you dictating to them saying, hey, this is the tip policy. This is how it's determined. This is what it is. Thanks, and sending them out the door. Open it up. Let them have a Q&A. Let them have a roundtable discussion. Make sure they feel comfortable asking questions and giving feedback and making this a two-way street, because that will save you so much time and money in the future. It's always worth mentioning. We see groups that don't utilize us and they get popped with a lawsuit and they come back to us on that front, say, hey, how do we get this right and where do we go from here? Even those groups that go on to win these lawsuits are expensive no matter what. You want a clean system of record. You want an audit trail all the way through that there is nothing to ever doubt, right? The data looks good. We understand exactly where every penny that came in as a tip went out as a tip to these staff members. Their labor tracking is accurate. We know their pay. We know what tip share percentages they should have received. We can verify all of these are correct. All of those squash this. And again, given that transparency, visibility, and have an open dialogue with your staff, That is going to be the most important thing. That helps to get you ahead of these. It helps to make your staff on your side. We always want to be sitting on the same side of the table as our team, as opposed to an adversarial kind of sitting across from each other and disagreeing on those measures. So, yes, everything Sohail said, and doubling down on communication, transparency with the staff, those are going to do wonders for you. And you've got another set of eyes. They'll highlight things that may not be clear. You thought they were clear, but they're not to your staff. You need to revise it. Or they'll say, hey, that's not my interpretation of it. You can align on an understanding of it. You can go forward together, but you want that buy-in as a team as much as you can get it. That really, really drives the pieces forward for you as an organization and as a team here. Awesome.
Thank you, Kirk. That's super helpful. And I imagine that for at least some of the folks on this webinar, they're probably curious, like, okay, TipHaus, Deputy, like the object of this webinar is not to talk about the two product lines too much about what it does. But the one question is probably like, okay, this sounds all great. Need to change something. I need to be better with transparency or with compliance. What could this solution look like? So we'll do one slide on that. So question for both of you. I'll throw it to Sohail first and then to Kirk. When Deputy and TipHaus are working together, like realistically, what is the day-to-day difference? Like I said, not the feature list, but what does a GM or a payroll manager or a server actually experience differently when these two platforms are leveraged together?
Yeah, thank you, Braden. So I think the day-to-day, the micro difference is that the labor side and the payout side are no longer disconnected, right? And for a general manager, that means fewer spreadsheets, fewer one-off reconciliation, less guesswork. When employees ask why they're paid a certain way, there's more clarity around that. So what does that do for a general manager? If they're not spending time doing all this reconciliation work, they're actually focusing on the business, the operation, the strategic side of the business to make that better. For payroll or HR, it means, cleaner handoff, more consistent reporting, fewer last minute corrections. So they can, HR staff can focus on the strategic HR vision of the company or the workplace that it may be. For employees, like Kirk talked about, more transparency, seat at the table, alignment, and they can see that their compensation is tied to actual work, actual roles, and clear allocation process. And I think for a business, it's just a scalable process and a stronger compliance posture because the workflow is easier to explain if questioned. Most businesses want to scale, go from one location to the next, to another, and expand in a very strategic way. And having a process like this aids in those strategic expansions, in my perspective. So the feature list is long, but the real value is confidence with managers, with employees, more confidence in your payroll data, and employees can trust the workflow more.
Awesome. Kirk, what about you? Anything to add there?
Sure do. I'll build on it real quick. So for server, agreed. Difference is trust. They stop wondering if the number's right. They know it's correct. That's great. That's a great piece to instill in your team. For a general manager, for any manager on site, closing managers, it's time. Don't spend the last 30 minutes, an hour of your day inputting manual tip entries. Don't look at cleaning up data pieces. Don't look at any of these items. Get out on the floor, touch tables, work with your staff, train individuals, stop fielding questions from them about their payouts that often get hostile or heated. And then for a payroll manager, it's twofold. One, it's defensibility. It's understanding that the data is correct, that your work is review as opposed to input and having to actually handle these items. And then two, it's similar, time savings. We just sat at a restaurant group of ours up in New York, and payroll lady came out and chatted with us while we were at the bar. And they went from 20 hours a month to 30 minutes a month because all the data is already there. It's just a review process now. It's no longer that piece. So those are the big, no feature list, biggest inputs and real savings that I see from people right there.
Okay, awesome. Well, as we move to this kind of our closing on the one element here, here's what I'd like to just a quick plug. We're going to get to the Q&A in just a second here. So if you do have a question that's top of mind, just throw it in the chat. Don't forget to do that so we can hit those for the remaining time. But just to kind of wrap things up, as John said, whether it's the one big beautiful bill or the working families tax cuts, not as fun to say, but it sounds better in some ways. The question for Kirk, I'll start with this one for you. Sure. Like service charges have brought stability, but voluntary tips, they now can carry real tax advantages and transparency benefits, like we mentioned earlier. So for operators still on the fence about rethinking their model, like what's your honest take on the risk of wait and see?
Yeah, the risk is lopsided. The cost of acting is, a couple of days worth of operational changes, conversations, auditing, going through it, making sure that, you understand. It's not to say get rid of service charges entirely. I think there's still a time and a place for them at this moment, but it is limited and very strategic. Servers are catching on to the idea that tips put a lot more money in their pocket come tax season around the end of the year. And you want to make sure you have that. Beyond that, cost of not acting, it's the tax benefit, it's potential compliance exposures, it's going to be continued trust erosion with your team. And like, to be very, very blunt and clear, like one big beautiful bill didn't create the problem. It made this lopsided equation more lopsided. It was easy to be, whether lazy or to focus on other items before and not go through these steps, not audit, not go through these items. Now you have to. You need to go through and review these. Servers, like I said, are catching on. Your turnover will go up. You'll get fielding more questions. You'll spend more time in the office, and you'll overall bring that morale of the team down. Window of this is not closed by any means, but it is closing, and groups are catching on. So you want to make sure that, if you were to go act, it needs to be over the next couple of weeks, months at minimum. Don't wait until the end of the year.
Love it. Awesome. And that's actually good timing for my last question before we jump it up to Q&A. So for both of you, what's one thing that you would tell this audience or any operator to do in the next 30 days? Something small, something concrete. What do you recommend to do right now that you can do today? Kirk, why don't you go first and throw it over to Sohail?
Sure. Number one thing is, audit your service charge language. Make sure you understand that piece. Audit your systems as you go through it. But, if I had to boil it to one specific, sit with your team, ask them questions. Where are they confused? What do they not understand? One big beautiful bill, and more commonly known as no tax on tips, right, was the colloquial name that got politicized. Even that's not accurate, right? There are taxes. There's Medicare and Medicaid still coming out of it. State taxes, unless you live in one of the states that has mirrored and followed federal law. So all of that, it's just an open dialogue. You may get questions that you don't know the answers to, but now you know what to go research to bring back to your staff and be kind of the hero and forward thinking and driving it forward. Number one piece, there's audits, there's lots of fun things that we need to do, but communication more than ever. It's a confusing time to be a server. It's a confusing time to be a manager. It's tough always in the hospitality industry. We don't need to make it tougher by letting 30 people have different connotations or knowledge base. Sit down, open a dialogue up, listen to the questions, provide answers and feedback. But make sure you guys are all uniting on the same page there.
Sohail.
I would say follow the money. And what I mean by that is run one end-to-end audit of a week or a sample, right? And trace the money from the guest check to employee-facing pay information, right? So pick a very busy week, I would say, and follow the flow from POS label, receipt languages, voluntary tip of service charge classification, labor data, tip pool logic, payroll code, employee statement, tax reporting path. Look at all of this. Look for matches. Look for mandatory charges labeled as tips. Look at your manual spreadsheets. I know a lot of people still have those. Look at the missing roles, location data. Look at manager participation. Check out employee confusion. Talk to your employees, right? That's another big one. And I would say don't try to solve all the problems at one time. You can't really do that. Just pick the first break in the chain, fix it before expanding the review even more. And the point is that not to make the system perfect in 30 days. The point is to whether the chain is traceable and start closing the biggest gaps first and then work your way backwards to smaller gaps.
Love that. Awesome. Thank you both for the time and for the presentation and answering my many questions. I'm going to flip it over to the Q&A side now. So as I go through these questions, again, type them in the chat if you're interested. We do have 10 minutes here to kind of answer these questions as they come in. I've got 5 so far that I'll hit on. And there's also QR codes here. If you're interested in learning more, of course, about either company, Deputy, or TipHaus, go ahead and grab your phone and take the QR code to where it needs to go. First question from Sarah. I'm going to throw this over to Kirk. How does TipHaus handle service charges versus tips differently in the system?
Oh, great question. We distinguish between the two. So assuming you're picking it up accurately from the point of sale, which all modern point of sales will distinguish for you if you set it up correctly, we handle those both separately. They're line itemed out differently. And so you can set up different tip policies. Hey, we tip pool a service charge, or we tip pool these tips and we ignore the other. Your export can have those separated. We can run custom exports for both so that payroll can get them in their different manners. But realistically, like how we handle them is treating them as the separate instances that they truly are. They've always been separate, a lot less stakes in getting them right in the past. So people kind of treated them the same. But from our system and from a compliance standpoint, we've always treated them separately, and nothing's changed on that end. 2 distinct columns. You can treat them both and layer logic and pools and everything else over the top. However you need that matches your restaurant's needs for the tip policy.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, question from Jason. Will we get a copy of the recording? I can answer that one. You will. If you registered, we'll send this out. Definitely be able to refer back to this. Watch it at 2x speed if you can keep up with my speed at 2x. Kudos to you. So no concerns there. All right, next question is from Linda. The one big beautiful bill is a federal change. This question is for Sohail. How do state-level tip laws interact with the federal change? And where do operators need to be careful?
I think, with the one big beautiful bill and the state laws, a lot of states have, already good tip laws, and some of them do follow federal law. But I would say follow those very minor changes that states have. And also, look at state overtime laws as well and see how those interact with tipped laws as well with compared to federal. Like, for example, one of the things that happened is the IRS talks about overtime with respect to everything out after 40 hours, right? But states start talking about it after 8 hours, 12 hours in a day. For example, California, Colorado's another one. So think about how those things interplay with each other and how that's going to impact your practices. And I would say the best thing you can do is look at your reports, examine your reports. For example, Deputy has Analytics Plus. We have great reports in that. And most providers do have good reports. So look at those reports, examine them, and work your way backwards.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Kirk, anything to add?
Yeah, please. We view it, and like we put out some pieces. There's 3 categories of this. There's like automatically conforming states. Some states follow federal law and their books adjust accordingly with it. Then there are states that are like actively adopting. They don't automatically follow, but they have put it through. And I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to be pinned down on this, but I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Sohail, you may know better. I think it's Michigan and Indiana that have enacted policies that follow federal law. And then there are states that are actively decoupling from it, right? They don't want to be, but the perfect example in Sohail's overtime about California, that's a big one that trips people up, is it's, the FLSA definition of overtime, 40 hours in a week. It does not matter if your state views overtime as daily. That is going to be taxed if they do not hit that 40 hours in a week. So each state is a little bit different. You want to follow the states that you operate in. Find your resources online, set up tags or feeds that let you know anytime there are updates to that compliance and any of the legislation. But yeah, I think Sohail nailed that.
Awesome. Okay, next question that I have here is from Mia. So she said she's searching for a solution to save her team right now on tip outs per night. Right now, it takes managers a while every shift, obviously, at the end of the night, because of how complex it is. Like, can TipHaus handle a setup like this?
Yeah, I would have to understand what you think makes it complex. But in general, our kind of byline or catchphrase is, as long as it's a legal tip policy, we can handle it. If you're just referencing actually paying out the staff, making sure they get paid daily, we have a whole product line. We're partnering with FDIC insured banks for that exact purpose. That was one of the first things we set out to solve. Is cash is dying, COVID was killing it, credit card tips have to go on paychecks. It's no fun for anyone. So if you were still paying cash, and good on you, you're trying to make sure you keep the servers happy and everyone like that. But yeah, we can pay that digitally. I'd have to understand your tax setup, but in general, yes, almost certainly we can handle that.
Awesome. And Mia, feel free to connect with the team here to kind of go more in depth. Of course, you'll have time to be able to do that, answer the questions. Love that. All right, last one that I have right now from Linda. What documentation should operators have on hand to prove their tip structure is compliant if they're ever audited?
Great question. I will tackle first, and Sohail, if you have things to add, please jump on with it. In general, you need a understanding of your tip policies as they stand today and as they have ever stood as you've operated. So if you change your tip pool and say, hey, previously hostesses were included and now we've removed them, or vice versa, whatever that looks like, you need just dates and documented changes on that. Similarly, you need to understand exactly every day who was involved in what tip pools, where money came in, where money went out. And that sounds simple, but it is not. The way we handle it at TipHaus is we do down to the 10,000th of a penny. For every single transaction that comes in, we can document where every single one of those goes out, making sure it always equals zero, right? Every single dollar and penny that comes in as a tip must exit as a tip to your employees. It can never touch management, it can never do any of those. So understanding and cleanly that every single sale and transaction needs to be documented. In the cloud, modern computing era, all of those are documented. It's just a matter if you have access to them easily and they are structured in a way for you to handle. So that is the number one piece, though, is anyone can start a lawsuit over this. They can claim that you were handling wage theft or tip theft. What you need is a clean system of record to show very clearly where all the money came in, where all the money went out, and what policies and rules were impacting your tip logic, whether it's sharing or pooling.
Sohail, anything to add?
Yeah, I'm going to take this question from answering Department of Labor subpoenas before. So what I would say is they're going to ask for your policy. They're going to want to probably speak to your employees a little bit if they really want to go down that route, do some interviews. And I would say they're going to want your P&L, more than likely, your POS reports, your general ledger, more than likely a report of your clock in and clock out, and your it's usually called a payroll report or a check register, something along those lines. They're going to want those, and they're going to want those in Excel formats to do their own forensics on it. So everything that Kirk said, yes, and plus on top of that from a legal lens as well.
Love that. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining. I really appreciate the time. Kirk and Sohail, thanks for spending the time and teaching us a little bit more about this beautiful bill act. If you have any follow-up questions, of course, I hope you grab the QR code. You can reach out to either one of our teams here at marketing@tiphouse.com and marketing@deputy.com. Thanks so much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Braden.